Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the webinar this morning. My name is Christina Gonzalez-Maddox, and I'm a research specialist with ITEP. I work with Sue Watkins in the climate change program, and Sue is going to be giving us a bit of an orientation this morning before our two presenters take over. So thank you so much for joining, and Sue, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Christina. So as Christina said, I'm Sue Watkins, Climate Change Program Manager with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, and we just really want to thank you for joining the webinar. This webinar series is highlighting tribes and tribal organizations that have been addressing climate change impacts through doing assessments and developing and implementing adaptation strategies. And also, on the last webinar, we will be providing an overview of funding and technical resources that are available both regionally and nationally. We are offering the webinars with support from the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station, and in collaboration with the U.S. Forest Service and with the Pacific Northwest Tribal Climate Change Project at the University of Oregon, and also the North Pacific Landscape Conservation Cooperative. Okay, I'm trying to advance. Oops. Okay, excuse me. Okay, today's webinar will feature a couple of projects that receive funding from the North Pacific Landscape Conservation Cooperative. And then our last two webinars will be in late February, one featuring projects by the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, and the other will have me and Kathy Lynn at the University of Oregon talking about funding and technical resources. If you have any questions during the presentations, please type your questions into the question box on the right side of your screen. And after the two presentations, the presenters will answer any questions that have been posed. And after the webinar, you'll receive a link to a short online evaluation form. And please take a few minutes to provide feedback and suggestions of topics for future webinars. That really helps us to shape future webinar series. And here's the contact information for me and Christina. ITEP's climate change program offers climate change trainings, webinars, a tribal climate change newsletter, and the Tribes and Climate Change website, and much more. We encourage you to visit our program website at the URL that's listed on this slide. And please feel free to contact us if you have any questions about ITEP. We're very pleased to have Lori Whitehead as our first presenter. And while we switch over to her screen, I will introduce Lori. Lori Whitehead is a lands manager with the Heiltsuk Integrated Resource Management Department. Her areas of responsibility include engagement with proponents and other levels of government on referrals for forestry, parks, marine transportation, and other proposals that may permit activities that could impact Heiltsuk Aboriginal rights and title, forest stewardship initiatives including implementation of ecosystem-based management and a strategic landscape reserve design project, timber and carbon credit analyses, community energy projects and planning process, conservancy planning, facilitating policy development, and assisting with research and educational protocol development and implementation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Lori, and she'll take it from here. Thank you.
Lori, just a quick reminder, you're still muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
Lori, we can't hear you right now. Do you want to try again?
Oh, okay. Yep. Um, okay, thank you for the introduction. And yeah, my name is Lori Whitehead, the Lands Manager with the Healthsick Integrated Resource Management Department. And today I'll be talking about the approach Healthsick have been taking to implementing ecosystem-based management on the Central Coast of BC and how we've been engaging in landscape reserve planning as part of a strategy for sustainable management and protection of natural resources. So as a quick overview, I'll show a map of Healthsick territory and describe the extent of it. I'll share a definition of ecosystem-based management. As background for our SLRD project, I'll provide an overview of some Healthsick planning processes for land and marine areas, and also government-to-government planning and agreements that we've entered into. And all of this planning resulted in some legal land use objectives for the Central and North Coast, and those provide the context for the strategic landscape reserve design work that we've been doing. For the SLRD project, I'll go over the methodology, some sample results, and a pilot project in the lLandscape unit, and then talk about how briefly that ties into our conservancy planning, and how finally the inventory and baseline data that we've been gathering can be used to inform climate change research that we're engaging in. And then I'll wrap up with some acknowledgements. So on the left, there's a map of the Central and North Coast areas of BC, and on the right, you can see Healthsick territory. The territory spans over 16,600 square kilometers of land and extends 200 miles offshore, and it makes up just over a quarter of the area that the provincial SLRD process encompasses on the north and central coasts. And so what is ecosystem-based management? Well, it was defined at a government-to-government level as an adaptive approach to managing human activities that seeks to ensure the coexistence of healthy, fully functioning ecosystems and human communities. And the intent is to maintain spatial and temporal characteristics of ecosystems so species and ecological processes can be sustained and human well-being supported and improved. And the photo that you see on the left is of Bella Bella, and it's looking east. So when we speak of human well-being, we're talking about things such as local employment, maintaining access to Healthsick forest and fish resources throughout the territory, among others. And so some of the context for strategic landscape reserve planning include plans that the Healthsick have engaged in. The land use plan was developed by Healthsick over the 1997 to 2005 period. And for that process, Healthsick identified areas to set aside as conservancies and other areas as ecosystem-based management or EBM areas. There's also been a marine use planning process in progress since 2001, and that continues on. The marine use plan is a spatial plan, and it includes best management practices to protect Healthsick values and ensure sustainable use of marine resources, including foreshore resources. And we've been working with neighboring nations we've developed a harmonized plan for the Central Coast area. Over the past several years, there's also been several government-to-government agreements that address and agree to do work together on EBM and conservancy planning. They also address human well-being, economic opportunities, shared decision-making, and basically a whole spectrum of planning. So I've listed a few of those agreements here. So in all of this planning resulted in a number of legal land use objectives in 2009, and The objectives for First Nation values include maintaining traditional forest resources, protecting traditional heritage features, protecting culturally modified trees, maintaining a sufficient volume and quality of monumental cedar, and retaining red and yellow cedar in stands. There's objectives for aquatic habitats. These include limiting equivalent clear-cut area to less than 20% in important fisheries watersheds, buffering high-value fish habitat with a 1.5 tree length reserve zone, maintaining riparian forest adjacent to streams, lakes, and fens that are not high-value fish habitat, and retention around forest swamps, upland streams, and active fluvial units. There's also biodiversity objectives. These include maintaining old forest and landscape level biodiversity, habitat for species at risk, ungulate winter range, regionally important wildlife including mountain goats, grizzly bears, northern goshawks, tailed frogs, and marble murrelet, protecting rare, threatened, and endangered and special concern plant communities, retaining 15% of trees at a stand level where there's clear-cut logging proposed, and maintaining grizzly bear and kermode or black bear habitat. And the legal objectives are presently under review. We wish to strengthen them, and with the existing objectives, they sound good, but the onus has been placed on us to locate and map where Heiltsuk forest resources and values, including culturally important plants, cedar stands and monumentals, and cultural heritage features and modified trees exist on the ground. We've been also identifying important fish habitat presently not protected in the orders and not requiring buffers under provincial legislation, particularly the smaller coho streams. And so the Strategic Landscape Reserve Planning Initiative emerged out of the government-to-government planning and collaboratively developed legal objectives. It is being pursued to implement legal orders to identify areas to set aside from harvest to achieve the ecological, aquatic, and First Nation land use objectives through designation of landscape level reserves in the EBM areas. Forest companies in the province develop draft SLRDs and actually finalize those through computer modeling and pilot projects that focus primarily on biodiversity and maintaining access to timber over the 2010 and 11 period. We started planning for participating in SLRD in 2010, and our work has been ongoing since then. A first step was identifying priority areas from our traditional use studies and local knowledge from the archaeological record and provincial data on productive streams and forest areas. We've prepared maps that apply buffers to important or potentially important sites, and hired field technicians, trained them, did ground truthing by collecting GPS waypoints and photos of features like big cedar, medicinal and food plants, and habitation evidence. And we've done that over the last couple of summer field seasons. We've had preliminary community verification focus group sessions and received input and revised maps and gotten direction for some additional areas to go to. And over the past summer, continuing through the present, we've been participating in a pilot project for the lLandscape unit. We'll be doing further community verification in the next few months, and then entering into government-to-government negotiations to identify and set aside areas that will maintain Heiltsuk values in the EBM areas over time, and to enable improvements in human well-being and ecological integrity. And so over the last couple of years, we've had our crews go out to 32 landscape units and focused on the EBM areas within those, from Butedale and Quicani in the north to Drainey in the south, and Kimsquit and Clayock in the east, and the areas in between. So this slide shows outcomes of a workshop, and a draft map. And just going back to the 2010 period, our project started with the workshop of the Forestry Committee to identify values in important areas of the territory, and that was followed by further identification of known areas with lots of values by a subcommittee, and then a mapping exercise to integrate the TUS map biography and other data into maps for ground truthing. And it's important to note that the HTUS data is interim. It's not fully representative of Heiltsuk use and occupancy. 22% of a target of 70% of adult Heiltsuk were interviewed. And we use the information to protect and enhance Heiltsuk Aboriginal title and rights. So on the right, the map, it's a draft map. It's got a lot of the data removed from it, but it's the type of map that we generated for our field crews to take out to the field with them. Data that we drew on for the SLRD work includes the traditional use areas other than most hunting, like kill locations and trapping. And so we'll be seeking community input on treatment of trap lines and wildlife habitat. It also includes burial sites and village sites. And we also drew on provincial forest cover data for areas with high potential for monumental and other cedar and forest and heritage resources. We drew on provincial archaeological data for recorded ARC sites, and also CMTs that had been recorded by ARC branch. Those are usually in areas that have been logged because they required ARC impact assessments, and then also those that are known internally and that our staff identified as part of their field work. For the aquatic data, we drew on the data for streams known to Heiltsuk to be important fish habitat, and so we have data from the late 1980s through the present that we've been integrating into a database, and also streams with observed and inferred fish, and that's using provincial and federal data. And